Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Jensen-Bohat. I'm the director of the Service Learning Program at Marquette University in Milwaukee. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk a lot about how we can create framework for our one-time service projects and how we can create those kind of meaningful reflection experiences. Just to introduce myself a little bit more, I've been the director of the Service Learning Program and the assistant director of the Service Learning Program for the last 16 years here at Marquette. And reflection is one of my passions, I guess, and one of the things I'm most interested in, because I think it's where the most learning takes place in community engagement work. So, and I will introduce my colleague will introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kelly Walker. I work here at Marquette in our Center for Community Service. So we're on the co-curricular side. I work out of student affairs, and I've been here at Marquette for about 4 years. One of the things my office does is our one-day service programs, and we treat those as sort of an entry-level, great way for students to dip their toe in the water with the intention for them to come back and get engaged in one of our more ongoing programs. So we consider our one-day events to be a really important opportunity, and it's important that we do them really well, and particularly structure our reflection really well to help our students move forward with some of their learning outcomes. So I'm excited to share some thoughts with you guys today, and this is by no means a perfect system. We're still learning and tweaking how we do this well, and so we'll be glad for any ideas that you're willing to share as well.
Great. So our agenda for today, just real quickly, is that we will talk about kind of a theoretical framework for reflection. We'll name some of our reflection gurus and some of the theory that they have behind creating meaningful, structured, critical reflection opportunities, some helpful tips and things to keep in mind, and then we're going to give you lots of examples of how we have done things like this at Marquette. So, and we have learning goals for you as well. So we want you to be able to articulate the theoretical framework for critical reflection, value the importance of the reflection process, and then identify strategies for implementing those meaningful experiences on campus. So great to see where some of you are coming from.
Yeah.
Very fun.
All right, so it looks like you started doing some introductions in the chat, but if we can ask you to add, it looks like you're getting name and institution. We'd love to know a little bit more about what your service program is going to be, whether it's on campus, what you're doing off campus, what community partners you're working with, and then any burning questions. So are there things you're particularly worried about or places that you're stuck? Are you completely beginner starting fresh, or have you been involved with reflection a few times before? So just help us get a sense of who's in the room so we can move forward. And hello to everybody who's sharing already.
Great. All right. So there's a lot of danger in not doing community engagement work well. And I think reflection is one of those things that really can make or break the experience. So we put up just some things that we've heard, from students or could hear from students that when they didn't have a real meaningful critical reflection experience. And so things like, oh, we were in a really bad part of town. Oh, I realize I'm so lucky, instead of kind of pushing more on that privilege and what that means. Or stereotypical comments such as if people would just go out and get a job. Things are just kind of not very self-centered thoughts such as, this was a great resume builder, I can't wait to do this again, as opposed to addressing, how do we look at some of those root causes and eliminate some of the root causes to the social justice issues that we're encountering in the community. Kind of not understanding how racism, classism, all the institutional discrimination plays a part of what we see in the community, I think is really another issue. So we also put up #blessed,
which my personal favorite,
which is where students just kind of walk away and say, oh, I'm so blessed. It's kind of like, I got all my toys and I'm going to go play in the corner by myself. I'm good. So helping them to dig deeper on that as well. So really important. We talk about in service learning, especially that reflection is kind of that hyphen between the service and learning. And even with co-curricular projects, we want those to be very meaningful in terms of both academic connection and value connection and citizenship. So just really important work.
Yeah. So speaking a little bit more about some of those landmines that we can run into, there we go. You know, we definitely have students that walk into our one-day service programs who are coming from, you know, I did service in high school. I've done, my favorite is when somebody walks up and says, like, I've done 100 hours of community service, and, you know, that they're really in that mindset of it's a good thing because it's fun and I like doing it and it makes me a good person. That's a great place to start. I was in that place. I can, you know, I get that. But it's our job with reflection to help people move past that a little bit. There's also the landmines around service in general, right? It's a loaded word that can sometimes reinforce power structures of people who are #blessed and can serve, and those who are recipients, right? That we're reinforcing some stereotypes that students might have about people who are in poverty, or, you know, who might exist out in the community that they haven't interacted with before. There's some real danger there in reinforcing those power structures. We hear that often in the languages about helping. You know, I was helping others, I was giving back, or fixing. So like community problems that me as a Marquette student or as a college student, I'm able to fix these problems that other people have. We frame that a lot in our with versus for conversation on campus. That's in our mission about the difference between doing something for others versus doing something with others in solidarity, and recognizing that community issues affect everybody, and that if we are one true community, that we have to do that together. That's a lot of ask out of a one-day service event, and maybe a 30-minute reflection at the end of the day. So just good things to keep in your mind and maybe spend some time personally thinking about, so that you can feel prepared to move forward with your projects.
All right, so now just to kind of help frame our work, we're going to give you some theoretical framework. So two philosophers to start things off, and, you know, a lot of experiential learning is based in John Dewey's work, so famous educational philosopher, and he basically says that critical reflection is an active, persistent, and careful consideration of any belief or supposed form of knowledge. Oh, sorry, hold on.
That was me, sorry.
In the light of the grounds that support it, and the further conclusions to which includes a conscious and voluntary effort to establish belief upon a firm basis of evidence and rationality. So basically, I mean, it's looking at what we thought we knew and reframing it and looking at it in a different sense. And so we want our students to kind of think about their previous presumptions, their assumptions about folks, what they thought was knowledge, what they thought was everybody's experience, and start to kind of reframe that given the fact that they're now getting new information through their service. Jack Mesereau also said that critical reflection is a process of testing the justification or validity of taken for granted premises. So I think it's important to think about what our students do take for granted, and what would kind of expand their horizons and give them an opportunity to think about their value system and kind of their thoughts about worldview, about their world. So then for critical reflection, so when we talk about critical reflection, we want to generate new learning, we want to deepen learning, and we want to document learning, okay? So in your projects, when you think about how you're going to incorporate reflection, you want to do all three of those things. We also talk about, Patty Clayton is kind of a big guru in the community engagement field, especially service learning. We're going to talk a little bit about her model and her framework for doing critical reflection. But what she says is that it needs to be viewed as analytical, integrative, accessible, subject to critique, and structured guided. I think a lot of our students have kind of, you know, a reflection is kind of this kumbaya moment, and it doesn't need to be that. It should be the structured, guided learning experience for students. So not just a touchy-feely private stream of consciousness. This is something that we want students to develop and use their critical thinking skills.
All right, so another set of gurus. We've got the 4 C's of reflection. So we'll give some examples of how we've done things like this. But first one being continuous, before, during, and after service. After comes pretty easily, but that before and during is important too. We can chat about that a little bit more. connected. So you've all been thinking about learning outcomes for your programs, so directly linked to those learning objectives allows for synthesizing action and thought, putting those two things together. Challenging, which I think is often where we get hung up, right? It's easy to have a nice conversation about, today we did a nice thing and this is what I learned and this is what I saw, but how do we really push students to move into that deeper critical thinking about structural inequality or some of the things that exist in their community that might be a little bit more scary to talk about with their peers. And then contextualize, so corresponding to learning goals, topics, experience in a meaningful way. I think even though these are one-day service programs, and I am assuming most of them are not particular classes that are engaging in this, it doesn't mean students can't be connecting that to their learning outcomes, the things they're learning in their coursework, or just what it means to be a college student in general. Just because it's a one-day service doesn't mean that we're not still connecting to those bigger questions. And then our good friends at Campus Compact talk about structured reflection. So examining critical issues relating to their project, connecting to the service experience, connecting it to their coursework, like what I was saying about connecting it to what they're studying, even if all the people in the room aren't studying the same thing. Enhancing development of civic skills and values, so sending our students out into the world ready to be members of a democratic society, and assisting students in finding personal relevance in their work. So what does this mean for me? How does this relate to my family, to my career, to who I'm going to be as a student and in my future? Okay, yep, so Kolb. So this is our basic what, so what, now what model. I find it really accessible. It's really easy to use with students, even when they're leading reflections and designing things. So we're starting with the what, right? So pretty nice way to ease in, right? So what happened? Tell me about it. What did you experience? What was your role? What did you see? What did you smell? What did you touch? Who did you meet? What are some of the things that happened to you during the day? So just, kind of entry, let's think about our day and make sure we're not missing any important pieces of that. Next piece is that so what. So what does it mean? How does this connect to bigger theories, whether that's courses that you're in or to the mission or the history of MLK Day? How are we feeling about those things? Sometimes I see so what / gut, like how are you feeling? Like what are the emotions that today stirred in you? And was this different in any ways from what you expected? Were there things that you saw differently from other times you've been in the community? Kind of those digging deeper pieces. And then it's sometimes easy to skip over this last piece of now what. So like walking out of this room, what are you going to do next? What's your responsibility? How are you changed and what does that mean for you? If we cut that part off, then I think we're leaving our students not in a great place.
Yeah. So we use this framework extensively. So we have at Marquette, for the service learning program, we have 14 students that work for us, and they are responsible for planning our reflection sessions. And so what happens is that, we have them help us write the learning goals, and we write a what kind of learning goal. We write a what kind of learning goal, and we write a now what kind of learning goal. And so then when we actually create the reflection activities, the first activity that we would have in a session would be the what. So we might do something more of an icebreaker where students have an opportunity to kind of share what they've been doing in their service learning placements and what their role were, what were some of the issues they encountered in the community. And then the next activity would kind of step it up another notch and do a so what. So the students, might do something where, like for example, we would use metaphor, and we've done things like use a tree and tree as a metaphor, and so the students have to fill in the roots of the tree. And so what are some of the root issues? What are some of the outgrowths? What's feeding the issue? So we use the tree as a metaphor to kind of help them analyze some of the things that they're seeing in the community, and that's very helpful. And then the now what, we might have them do a 5-minute writing prompt, and so then they write through that and say, what they could do about this, where would be some places that what needs to be addressed, and then how did this shape their learning, and how this changed how they were thinking. So we use this extensively. It's almost like a little worksheet that we use. All right, so this is another model for a framework, and it's very similar. I think Patty Clayton, again, is one of the big gurus in the field, and I think that she's just kind of expanded a little bit on Kolb's model. So the idea of DEAL, okay, so DEAL stands for describe the experience, examine, and then articulate the learning. So very similar, in kind of this critical analysis. Specifically, so they should examine their personal growth, their civic learning, and then their academic learning. So how has this shaped their personal values? How has this, have they learned more about the political systems, the institutional systems? How does this motivate them then to be a more active citizen? How does this help them to think about some of those social justice issues that they're encountering through their service? And then also academic learning. On service learning, that's very important, but like Kelly said, I think it's important for them to reflect about, does this reinforce their academic path that they want to take? Does it negate it? Do they want to do something different? Does this highlight some of the things that they're talking about in their core classes, so that they can connect as well?
And you might also have, so we have shared co-curricular learning outcomes, but your office probably has learning outcomes for your students more broadly, and I would consider those part of that academic learning piece.
Mm-hmm. So how do you connect to those as well? Mm-hmm. So some sample prompts then using the DEAL is again, it's similar to the Kolb model, in terms of describe. But then, what ways did you see differentials between power and privilege and emergent experience for like the civic learning? What assumptions did I bring to this experience, and how do they impact the experiences? What were my blinders? Where were my, where did I not, what did I not understand? How does this experience then connect with the topics we've covered in class? So, and then they articulate learning. So what did we learn about the community, and why is this learning valuable? How are we more informed as citizens of this community? So those are all important. So again, you can use this as a basic worksheet for providing the framework for your activities. Feel free, if you want to use chat for any questions as well.
All right, we've got Kim and Kelly's tips for reflection.
Tips for reflection. All right, so the first thing we want folks to do when they're thinking about plan their reflection as well is to kind of think about the situational factors at play. Who's your audience? Who are the students that are going to be a part of this reflection session? Are they entry level, advanced? Do you need to kind of plan for the demographics in terms of the gender of the folks, the race, socioeconomic status? Is your goal to be more service focused, or is it more to be justice focused? And how can you kind of lead students between, on a continuum, kind of understanding the importance of more charity-based work, and then also understanding that at the top level, that the justice issues, looking at the more macro level issues and things at play, how can you kind of guide them through that? Are they student activists already? Do they have some experience with this work? And that'll, determine how advanced you want your questions to be, and how do you kind of move them that way? Are they strangers to that community, or is this part of their community? I think that makes a really big difference. We talk about students who might be going home and then they're going back into the communities that they grew up in, or that they're very familiar with because the folks look a lot like them and have had a lot of the same experiences. Or is this, a lot of our students at Marquette here is a residential campus. They're coming from, all across the Midwest, even further. Is this community a new community to them? And then how do you help them understand some of those dynamics of the community? Those two reflections can look very differently, and I think we need to be very mindful of the difference of teaching students who might be more privileged and going into less privileged areas versus students who come from those communities as well.
Can I add?
Sure, please do.
In my experience on our campus, MLK Day gets us a really interesting mix of students, and a different challenge than I think most of our day of service programs have. We get students who love service and are ready to, sign up for anything that I ask them to do. And then we get students who are really committed to more of the mission of MLK Day and the legacy of the civil rights movement and want to identify with that. And so put those people in a room together, and it's almost like you're planning two different sets of reflections, right? Because things are hitting people really differently. So just, keep an eye on why people are there and what impact they might have on each other. And it could be a really good and interesting conversation for everybody in the room, but also has some pitfalls. Especially if, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but some of your activities are going to depend on trust amongst your group. So do you have a group that is a residence hall that already really knows each other, or is it cherry-picked from throughout campus where they might just be strangers who are in a group? That makes a huge difference on your dynamics as well.
Mm-hmm. And then the last part of that slide is, are these folks, who's going to be there? Is it mostly students? We've been doing some things where we've been inviting our community partners and our faculty and things to come back and reflect with our students. And that also changes the dynamic of those reflection sessions as well. So I would encourage that. I think that the different lens and perspective that faculty and community partners or community members can bring is really valuable for our students, but that will also kind of change some of the tone of the reflection session. And we also do a lot with peer-led reflection, and so those, that leads to a very different conversation than if a faculty member is leading those reflection sessions.
Okay, another basic when you're just thinking about your structure is, when are you doing this reflecting? So it's easy, traditional to do a short program after they're engaged in service. That's a great start, but it definitely doesn't have to be the only option. So we try and use an opening program as often as we can with some sort of speaker that gets people excited about the day, but also gets them thinking about a particular theme, or even if that's conversation starters amongst the group that are a little bit more meaningful. I'd also suggest thinking about how can you use reflection throughout the program. I'll show you where we use this example a little bit later, but once when we had just kind of a big chaotic event where our students were really scattered, we walked around with poster board with prompts on it, things like what would MLK be fighting for if he was alive today, or why are you here? Why are you involved in service? And had people look at what other folks had written and add comments to that. And so we could make sure that we were checking in with them throughout the day, that they were still thinking about why they were there. And then it became an interesting piece, think piece to have at a reflection at the end of the day. And we could also display it for people to keep thinking about it afterwards. And then lunch breaks, travel time, those are really great opportunities. You obviously want to allow people to get to know each other and feel comfortable. And, if lunch break is a good time for that as well, but that doesn't mean that it can't be well-utilized time to think about reflection.
And even sending an email or something if you have a registration list ahead of time, and just send them some email prompts to kind of think about, just to kind of shape and frame the day and the learning that you want to have take place.
And then there's the where, right? So you really don't want your reflection experience to feel like it's tacked on at the end and, it's kind of a burden. You want it to feel like it's a smooth part of the day. Sometimes that's easier than others, right? So, for example, one year it was an MLK Day. We had everybody get off the bus and they had to travel to the opposite side of the building to come to the room to do reflection. How many people do you think came to that reflection? Not zero came to that reflection. But years where we've been able to do it on site, if we were at a high school, so we were able to use one of their classrooms, or honestly incorporating food. I know that sounds silly, but having a cup of hot chocolate in your hand and a cookie to snack on makes it feel like, okay, we're taking this snack break. Look here, I'm going to do this reflection as well. So if there's ways that you can add it in, I don't want to overemphasize the importance of food, but it helps. So how can you create that environment that encourages participation, first of all, but also critical thinking? So something that feels like, not necessarily like a classroom, but something that feels a little bit more comfortable and safe and constructive, but also encourages people to think critically, right? So it's a combination of those. And then what environmental factors or group dynamics might be barriers? So, certainly students that have mobility needs, things like that you want to be thinking about, but also it made a world of difference when we moved from the ballrooms with the glaring lights to turning the lights down a little bit and putting candles on the table. And it made a surprisingly huge difference. Not to make it feel, that touchy-feely idea, but just to get people to kind of settle in and imagine. And then thinking too about group dynamics that might be barriers and things that you might want to think about.
So I think probably one of the trickiest things about doing reflection for a one-time event where the students may or may not know each other is really building the trust that you need for them to feel vulnerable enough to share. So we want them to be kind of outside of their comfort zone a little bit, but supported in being outside of their comfort zone, and that they're willing to kind of get beyond their very safe, nice answers, and that they're able to kind of talk real talk with each other. So I think that's tricky. There's lots of different things at play in a setting like that. But I think it's really important for them to be able to, I think it's important for you as a facilitator to really be very intentional about how you're going to help create trust. Otherwise, you're going to get very nice answers on their reflection questions, and they're not going to dig very deep. So the first thing I would suggest there is to make sure that you have ground rules that you cover at the beginning of the conversation. Things like using oops and ouch as ways to kind of respond to each other. So, that people, if something is hurtful or discriminatory, that people can say oops. Or they can say ouch if it hurts them. And if they say something that they think came out the wrong way, that they can say oops. So using that oops and ouch. Also things like step up and step back, or pipe up, pipe down, where a lot of times that the same students will be the ones that kind of dominate the conversation. And that doesn't establish trust, that if the group leader lets the one person ramble and ramble and ramble, it's not establishing trust. So using ground rules, there's lots of things on the web that are available. We've got them, I'm happy to share those if anyone wants to email me what we use. But I think that's very important. Build the community throughout the day. Don't just wait till the reflection. So how can you be intentional about how you're building community throughout the service project? Even before the service project, maybe asking folks, what are you nervous about? What, to kind of create the culture of this sharing. What are you most excited about? What are you looking forward to? Why did you choose to do this? Those kinds of things, when people can see the relatability of each other, and that they can kind of start off small and build into deeper conversations. So again, that, icebreakers and community building activities are really important in this kind of work.
And if you have student leaders that are involved in this day, you can ask them to set the example too, about how are they going to engage the student who's, maybe doesn't know as many people, or, they can be good role models too. All right, tip 2, guiding learning. So thinking about your activities and how they build upon each other, right? So the what, so what, now what model sort of builds that in already, that what is starting with some pretty accessible, safe activities and discussions that do those pieces of building trust, get people willing to participate. Sometimes I have to remind myself that questions that feel like a waste of time to me are important still. If it's getting people to enter into the conversation and to, be ready to go deeper, then they're still important. And then building on that with some so what activities that deepen expectations for critical thinking. And if you have to name it, ask students to challenge themselves, ask them, to grapple with difficult topics, that you're not looking for them to sit there and not take any risks. You want them to dig in, and that's why you're there for the day. And then, of course, sending them out with a now what, with a self-identified next step. So taking a good look at your activities and how do they build on one another? How do your questions build on one another? Maybe starting with a little bit easier and digging into more critical. So
tip 3 is that you want to balance different vehicles for learning. So by vehicles, we kind of mean like modes of delivering this information. So, I think about multiple intelligence as kind of theory on this, and that, people learn differently than, from other people. And so you want to try to tap into different modes and vehicles for delivering this work. So, and I would mix up the activities as much as possible to kind of keep the students engaged. You don't want this to feel like, a classroom lecture. Not that, good things happen in classroom lectures and things, but you want this to be this more informal, comfortable environment. So using things like written work, 5-minute papers where you give people an index card and 5 minutes to write. Oral, so that they get a chance to stand up and say things, either to the whole group or to small groups. Artistic, that's what we use like for our metaphor. We've had students draw things to kind of examine things. Multimedia is another way to do it. So, having students to create a video or a PowerPoint or something like that describing their experience, if you have the time to do that. Think about how you're going to deliver this as well in terms of, does it make sense to do some of this individually where students have a chance to digest individually? We use a lot of think, pair, share, where students work in pairs. Small group activities where that might be, something like anywhere from 4 to 10 people at a round table discussing, or if you want to do this in a large group with everybody. So think about what makes most sense for you. How can you create an opportunity for physical movement around the space? Folks get tired of sitting, and actually there's studies done that when people are moving, they're actually learning that way. And so how can you use that discussion wisely and offer ways? I think this is important too, that some students will be naturally quiet. So no matter how much trust you create and how many icebreakers you do, that they're still going to be quiet. So how can you kind of draw on that and help draw those folks out by giving them maybe a quieter reflection or a more individualized reflection opportunity? So I mentioned some of these, but just to kind of give you ideas of how we've done some of this. So we use a lot of TED Talks to there's lots of them out there that cover a lot of themes that would be important in community engagement work. So we would use those as kind of a jumping off point and then create questions about the session, because this is really a mix between kind of education and personal value reflection. So we've done things like drama, spoken word. You want to talk a little bit about your spoken word experience?
So one of the best MLK reflections I've ever been to actually was we went to a performance of dramatized readings of MLK's letters and speeches and things, and I think that just led to a really great conversation, much different than it would have been if we had read them on a piece of paper, and that's something that you can do on a small scale and homegrown. We've also mentioned this a little bit later, but used students who wanted to do spoken word poetry, and I think that really was powerful because it was a peer and somebody that they could relate to and they felt a lot of empathy for.
Mm-hmm. Writing prompts are nice because then you can either have the students take the writing with them so that they can continue to kind of reflect on that or revisit it, or you can keep it to kind of document the learning so that you can rationalize these activities to your department, use it to apply for additional grant money, things like that. So that's the nice thing about writing prompts, and I think we think when we're writing, it's a high impact practice in terms of a pedagogy. So I mentioned think, pair, share. If you're not familiar with that, it's where you give the students an opportunity to think about a question for a few minutes on their own. You pair up with somebody and then you share kind of your thinking back and forth. It's a very nice technique, very easy to do. We also use simulations or games, and I'll talk a little bit about simulation towards the end of the presentation, but one of the things that we do, we have a game of life. It's like a board game where students get a scenario that they kind of play a persona that they keep throughout the game. So they get a card that tells them about who they are in the game, what their character is, and then things happen throughout the game. And it helps them to kind of see some of the barriers institutionally that exist for folks, that it's not just a free will pull yourself up by your bootstraps type of opportunity. So using games, real active learning, and then we debrief the game afterwards. We also do things like concept mapping where students would draw circles and kind of connect how the topics that they're seeing in the community intersect. It's a great way to kind of help students reflect on intersectionality, fill in different things that way. And then I talked a little bit about metaphor or parables. So using, we do things like the dandelion in the lawn, and the dandelion is the social justice issue, and, what fertilizes that social justice issue, and does it look nicer to some people than others? And it's a good way to help students think a little bit more deeply. They grab on to those really nicely. And parables, stories, like the starfish, it mattered to that one story. Have you ever heard that one? So it helps students to kind of make sense of it all.
Can I add one more? We
Sure.
didn't on this, but I'm a recent convert to listening pairs.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of having a small group discussion, or even a pair discussion, giving each student 3 minutes to just talk without interruption to their partner, and then to flip the table and their partner gets to talk for 3 minutes. That has been a lot more impactful than I thought it was going to be. I think it gives people a good opportunity to really process out loud and be heard, especially for people like me that are a little more introverted. Okay, so your facilitators matter, right? We talked before about maybe having community members in the room, and I think that could offer you a great opportunity for facilitation. If you have peers that are available that are well-trained, I think that's a great opportunity. If you have student employees or leaders on campus, but they have to be good, right? So they have to have a lot of training, and you can't just send them into to something where they might not feel comfortable, right? So like the landmines we mentioned at the beginning, we want to have our facilitators be able to handle some of those thought bubbles of things where, somebody says, racism isn't really a problem anymore. So it's nice that we celebrate MLK Day. They have to be ready to understand how to deal with that and to handle those difficult situations. I think especially this year, you should be thinking about if and when the election comes up and politics comes up in your reflections, how are you going to handle that? What conversations are you hoping students will have, and which ones might be too much for the context of your reflection? So I think peers are a really great opportunity if you feel confident in them. They also need to have that ability to manage those group dynamics, right? So if you're in a small group and somebody just will not be quiet, and the other 3 members of the group aren't able to step up because of that, that's a tricky thing as a peer to be able to jump in and have a handle on. So, we really encourage you to think about peer facilitators, but also think about the training that they would need, and some other options and ways you could support them if things maybe get to be more than they can handle in that moment. You guys use a lot of peer facilitators.
Yeah, we use a lot of peer facilitators, but we also do a lot of training with our students, and we use students who have experience in terms of they've done a lot of service themselves and things like that. But it is hard, and I mean, microaggressions come up in group. People say stereotypical things, and so it's tricky because I think it does necessitate some finesse and expertise when doing that to do it well. Because again, it goes back to that idea of we don't want to perpetuate stereotypes and do more damage than good.
And then our last tip is just the idea of your reflection being clear and organized. Every time we do an event, we just have a one-pager. We might have other documents and things that we need, but they go through 1, 2, 3, 4, here's what we're doing, here's the process. Helpful, next year when somebody's looking to plan this and they're looking for some place to start. But my probably most important advice with this is sticking to a theme. It's really easy for you to want to tackle 4 different ideas around social justice or around, let's even say the civil rights movement or something like that. In a one-day service program and, a short reflection, I found it much more helpful to identify the theme that you really want people to dig into rather than going surface level on a couple of different things.
All right, so now we're going to give you just a couple of ideas of how we have done some reflections. So we're going to give you some sample reflections to think about. One of the things that we've done here is when we're looking at food access, hunger, social welfare programs that address hunger and things like that, and poverty, we wanted to give our students, before they even went into their service, an opportunity to kind of reflect on how hard and difficult it is, and so that helped kind of create some empathy from the get-go. And so that was really kind of one of our learning goals, is to help students to be compassionate, when they go out to do their service. So what we did is we brought in, as a pre-service reflection opportunity, we brought in Hunger Task Force, which is one of the big food pantry, food bank programs here. It's a local program. And they actually have a hunger educator. So that person's job is to go out and educate folks about hunger awareness. And so they have a real nice simulation that they do where students had to fulfill the nutritional needs for their family for 3 days. And so again, they were kind of a persona to play. And then they had to go out and get the food that they needed to kind of fulfill the nutritional guidelines as set by the Department of Agriculture. So they had some of them had limited means, some of them had pretty good means and were pretty wealthy, and they didn't have an issue getting their stuff for the day. But the students had to move around and go to a grocery store and a WIC clinic and a food pantry, and had to go get their driver's license in order to be able to go to the grocery store and things like that. So it kind of gave the students an awareness of how many hoops people have to jump through in terms of the social welfare system, and how difficult it can be if one thing, you lose your driver's license, or you're not a citizen and you don't have access to some of these resources, how difficult things are. So the students then debriefed that experience and then related it to their upcoming service. So it was a very powerful opportunity. So think about pre-service. I think it also gives you a chance to get to know the students and where they're coming from, and kind of gauge what you need to do in kind of some of the post-service opportunities.
So this was our reflection in MLK 2015. So we, like I mentioned before, had these kind of poster boards that we walked around with during the day. We got people chatting. And then after the program, after we returned to campus, we had a student do a spoken word poetry performance. And that was really interesting for me because I had to give up a little bit of control, right? I had to, let them say what they wanted to say and not have a full script beforehand. So that was a good professional experience for me. And that was a student who had been on site with them during the day, which I think was powerful. And then we structured a what, so what, now what from there. So talking in pairs about what parts of the performance stuck out to you. We had people write down phrases or words that they heard the student use that were meaningful to them. So just think, pair, share about that. And then we provided them with 2 different MLK quotes. One was a little bit more entry level. I forget what the first one was, but the second one was the one about progress not being inevitable, and had some prompts at the table that were peer facilitated about the quotes, what they meant to them, what their reactions were, how they saw that relating to our service that day. And then we gave each participant some journaling cards. So on one side, which is where we had them start for 4 minutes or something, was what would MLK do today? So imagine 2015 at this time, what sort of things would MLK care about today? And then hopefully they didn't see the other side before they did that. And then we had them flip it over, and it was like, what will I do? What can I do? What are some next steps for me? And those were personal, but we gave them a chance to share those at the table as well. So that was, like 40 minutes or something like that, plus time for hot chocolate. This was our most recent Make a Difference Day. Our theme had been community, and how building community in small ways can help us strengthen our ability to react to some of those bigger, harder topics, like racism or hunger or, whatever it is that all of our students were raking leaves with an older adult that day. So it felt like a small thing to them, and we sort of had to address that. So we had a pre-reflection keynote on the theme of community on that same idea that got them excited, but also had them moving forward. The what was just some casual questions as they were settling in, getting their hot chocolate, like I said. Then they had a secondary kind of what conversation where they went up to this web in this picture. And I know it looks like chaos, but in the circle there in the middle were the names of the older adults that we worked with that day. On the left and the right was some blank space for a student to write their name. And then on the top and the bottom were other ways to build community. So things like getting to know my neighbors, voting, being aware of social justice issues in my community, shopping local, things like that. And they had room to write in their own as well. And then we had students make a connection between their name, the name of their older adult, and then their name and any of the other things that really were reflective of their experience, so things they had been involved in. So we had them, get up, move to that, go back to sit down. Had some discussion questions. They were, because it was a kind of a fall day, we had them on leaves. So they each picked a leaf out of the middle of the table, had some conversation, and those were some of those more critical thinking ones about what does community mean? What sort of things prevent us from building a strong community? What are things we can tackle together? Digging into some of those things a little bit further. They then, so that was maybe like a 15-minute discussion with those prompts. And then they had a secondary web activity that was more of a now what. So you can see the little yellow squares of paper where they each identified something that they were going to do to build community. We didn't necessarily give them a ton of prompts, but it was just like, okay, now what? Now what are you going to do after Make a Difference Day? And they went back up to the web and found their string and taped it to it. And then we, as you can tell, this is in a display case in our office. A little worse for the wearer, I think, at this point. Maybe it's time to take it down. But so something that they could be reminded of as they walk by. And these are just some odds and ends activities that I thought might be helpful to think about. So the one on the left is a postcard that we use with our Urban Connection program. That's at the very beginning of the year, so it's a little bit different. But we have students write postcards to themselves, and then we I read a lot of them because it's a helpful assessment for me to be able to say this is what students are thinking about after Urban Connection. And then we mail them to them about 6 weeks into the school year. So you could do something like that where they're reflecting and then they're going to get reminded of that a little bit later. It's easy for us because most of our participants in that live on campus, so they're easy to get to their rooms. But the one on the right is my go-to, the how do you define service activity. I found makes for a really good conversation no matter what the student's level is. So we use it with our freshmen and we use it with pretty advanced seniors where they have to think about their personal philosophy of service and rank it individually, and then have a conversation with one other person to compare and contrast, and then bring it to the bigger group and try and figure out why people have different rankings and what service really means to them and what their goals are and why they're looking at the world that way. From the Haas Center? We've been using that one for a long time. I don't know where it came from.
I think that's from the Haas Center at Stanford.
I find that some of the conversation there is like, well, I consider service, the most important service, to be the things that are the biggest burden on the person who's serving, which is an interesting thing to kind of push back on versus the things that make the most impact, or the things that have the biggest reach versus really impact one person really strongly. It tends to be a really good conversation.
Hey, Kim and Kelly, I just have a quick question here. Sorry to interject. Someone posted something in the Q&A that I thought was really connected to what you're talking about here. They had a question about what reflection questions you could share with their community partners to use.
Like a list of reflection questions?
Yeah, a list of reflection questions, or if you have some suggestions for activities that you think that they could use.
Yeah, I have a one-pager of questions and a one-pager of activities that I would be glad to send along to you. Could we share that with the group afterwards?
Yeah, feel free to send that to me in an email, and then I'll post that up next to the recording.
Yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
Does that sort of answer the question?
Pardon?
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, they also asked about other examples of reflection, but I think we're going through that right now. So, cool.
And then Social Change Wheel from Minnesota Campus Compact, I think always makes for an interesting conversation about ways to impact the world. And something about MLK Day just feels different to me. There's a built-in theme and a built-in expectation that you can have that conversation about. Martin Luther King wasn't spending his days, packing boxes of food necessarily. He was working on this other scale. How are those things connected, and how are those things both important? And I don't know, it can lead you down a path, and I think the Social Change Wheel and the How Do You Define Service activity would be good ways to start that conversation.
Oh, that's okay.
So we didn't leave as much time as we anticipated for Q&A or other ideas that you all want to share. Justin, do you want to unmute people so they can jump in, or should we do this just via the chat box?
If folks want to enter things into the chat box or into the Q&A, feel free to do that. If you specifically want to ask a question over the phone or whatever, just let me know, and I can upgrade you to a panelist, which will allow you to use your microphone.
Perfect.
I'll just, while people are thinking about questions, if you go to the Marquette Service Learning webpage, you can see kind of our reflection series. And I think that will give you ideas as well for topics that you might want to focus on. We usually do, we have 6 different reflection sessions that are open to everybody who's doing service learning. And I think those topics will work just fine for MLK Day and other one-time service events. We're doing one about privilege specifically. We've done them about, the roots of social justice. We've done them on vocation. We've done them on how spirituality factors into service. So those, we change those every semester. But yep, thank you. Thanks, Justin, for putting the link up. Great.
I'll put that on the website too.
Yep, thank you. So that would give you some ideas, I think, as jumping off points for themes as well. You're welcome. We'll give people a couple minutes to type up their questions.
I'm curious to feel out, are folks feeling like they need more info about the whole the theoretical framework, or are you feeling like you get the framework but you're not actually sure of the activity? How do I actually put this into something I can do in an hour or whatever? So what areas do you feel like you still could use a little bit more info? I don't know how to do this.
Justin, can you see that?
The raised hand?
No,
yep. I promoted them to panelist. So hopefully that.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. Yes. Hi.
Hi. So one thing about I'm sorry, I'm Chanel. I'm from Winthrop. And one thing about our MLK Day of Service is that we typically, as you mentioned, host a reflection at the end. But in the beginning, we typically have a student group or organization kind of put on a type of, little skit or something like that about MLK Day, something that reflects it. So I guess my question is, of course, we want to replicate the success that we've received in the past, but we also want to do something different where we're incorporating more of a reflection piece, within our service sites. And I guess I'm just asking, I don't know exactly how we should go about that.
Within, during the day while they're activity?
Yes, during the day.
What are their sites? What are they doing?
So we have a feeding project where some people are going downtown and they're baking some food and then feeding some of our community partners. We have another site where you have individuals going to the Adult Enrichment Center, which is basically an adult daycare. We're working with veterans. So that's really what our focus is on, veterans and hunger.
Okay, and it sounds like they'll be working with people in the community,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Is there a way to get questions? I mean, I don't know if you're going to be there. A lot of times we send people out and then there's not really a facilitator. can you get some of those questions to the site contacts so that they can check in? Because, in service learning especially, we talk about how community is co-educator. And so that's a role that I think we've discussed this, that our community partners like to have. I mean, I think they feel like, exposing students to some of these issues and helping them to understand the population that they work with is important for them in the long run, because our students are going to be more empathetic and ethical when they are out in the world as well. So possibly giving site contacts questions that they can address, or is there a way to put questions kind of in the back room, of the kitchen, stick them to the refrigerator or something like that, help them think.
I wonder, so since they're working with people, is there a way that you can shape the conversations that they're having with people in a way that's going to be reflective of your learning goals? So not necessarily that they're just talking amongst themselves, but asking them to, I don't know if you'd want to have them interact with people and asking them about their experience of, civil rights, or, asking those sorts of questions. But I almost don't want to distract them, because they could be having really good conversations that are going to give you more to reflect on afterwards. So if you could spend your time making those conversations really rich and meaningful, I almost think that that's important.
Okay, because that's something that we were definitely working on, especially with our veterans, just considering the population and just considering the students that are going to be interacting with them as well. There's that generational as well as the just a gap in general, and just so many different strides and so many different levels. So that's one thing that we're definitely trying to make this meaningful as possible. And in regards to getting some questions to site supervisors, that would actually is good, because what we're having is in the beginning of just whatever site they're going to, the site supervisor is going to be stating, who they are and what they do in the community. So definitely having those questions, as you mentioned, will be beneficial to all.
I wonder if you could kind of give them an out, so I know our students sometimes get really nervous about that first interaction with somebody and they don't know what to talk about. Telling them that they can say, Chanel told me that I had to talk to you, that I had to talk about whatever, kind of gives them an excuse to ask more meaningful questions too, knowing that sometimes that's a little bit, they get nervous,
And asking about the site contacts too, not, because sometimes it's not ethical to ask community partners. Depends on the question,
Okay.
Good luck.
Thank you for your question.
All right. Thank you for answering.
It looks like Ellen has a question. Let me just read it for a second.
And then we also have a question in the Q&A when you're done with that one.
Yeah. We run into this a lot, Ellen.
I think it's important to have, with students, they're so busy and they're easily distracted. And I think that, whenever you can kind of capitalize on a captive audience, I think that's important. So again, if you are signing them out on the bus, is that a time that you can actually have a conversation on the bus, or some sort of writing prompt or something that they could do? It's difficult, I think, when you set people loose and then expect them to come back, unless I think I would probably pull on your food. Food is an incentive. I think door prizes, as silly as that sounds, could be an incentive as well. You're going to raffle off some, for the local Jimmy John's or whatever it might be.
Or use that as a teaching tool too. Find some really cool local restaurants or local people doing interesting things and raffle off places they might not normally go.
We've done things instead of coming back to campus, we've brought folks back to we have a big organization in town that actually has a restaurant. It's a social service agency, and so the United Community Center has a restaurant called Cafe El Sol, and so it gives them another opportunity to be in the community and interact in the community, and it's really it's cool. So you might not be able to subsidize that experience, or maybe you just have, chips and salsa or something like that. It depends on where you are. But that might be an incentive to continue the theme and continue the community involvement and community engagement opportunity.
We also have more success when they have to come to us because they have our stuff. So we gave them a pair of gloves or a rake, and they have to return it. They don't want a giant rake in their car anymore, so they end up returning their stuff and then realizing, like, hey, everybody's looking at you, like, I'm gonna walk in, and it works for what it's worth.
And I think explaining, I don't think our students understand the importance of reflection. So I think, at the beginning of the project, explaining why this is so important. Like, this isn't just let's go do this for fun. There's a learning objective, and you have something to benefit from this experience.
Including, do you call it reflection, or do you come up with a different name for it? Because I know my students think when I say we're going to reflect, they imagine like, okay, we're going to all sit under a tree and hold hands, and could you call it something else that might be a little more appealing?
I hope that helps, Ellen.
Yeah, good luck.
And then we have one question here in the Q&A. Do you have any suggestions for reflection activities for kids specifically? Their MLK project is an intergenerational event, and they have elderly community members join our students in the past. This year, however, they're incorporating at-risk youth from a local after-school program and are trying to brainstorm ways to effectively reflect with them.
It's awesome. That's an awesome experience.
Yeah.
I think, depending on the age of the children, they're high school students. Is that what? Did you say that, Justin?
It doesn't say their specific age. It just says at-risk youth.
Yeah. I think that, things like metaphor, I think you could use that even with younger folks. I think that you would get some pretty interesting answers to something like that and different perspectives.
For me, the outcome from a conversation like that would have a lot to do with breaking down stereotypes around, like, the youth as people being served by, our students, and trying to incorporate a way for the youth to step up and say what MLK Day means to them and what they want from their community, and give them opportunities to show all of their strengths and assets in a way that might make my students at least kind of sit back and listen a little bit more than having them talk. I don't know what sort of activity that looks like necessarily, maybe an art project or,
can the youth maybe do spoken word or something like that, where things like that, where they actually have an opportunity to share, or they exchange writings or something like that. They make a banner about what their hope is for their community together. So there's...
Well, that's cool. I like that. We do a lot of walks where we pair people up and just tell them to go for a 10-minute walk and talk about these two things. And that tends to be pretty effective. So to have, a youth and a college student go for a walk and talk about the things that their most proud accomplishments in their life or something like that could be really interesting. Depends on what age they are.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Great. Well, we're a few minutes past 11 o'clock, so I think we're going to wrap things up. But thank you, Kim and Kelly, for taking time out of your day to deliver this wonderful wealth of information. So just as a quick reminder to everyone, I will post a recording of this up on the MLK website, and we'll send a link out to everyone shortly after. So thank you, everyone, for attending, and I hope I'm looking forward to seeing how reflection plays in your MLK Day of Service projects.
Good luck, everybody.
Good luck. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.